Most entrepreneurs begin their journey without the right skills, often without the right guidance, and very often even without the right mindset. We created Face2Face to be an opportunity for Malaysian entrepreneurs to literally come with some of the world's most renowned captains of industry and management thinkers.
Our very first innovator, a big round of applause for the one and only Tom Kelley.
This human-centered approach of design thinking starts before problem solving. If you look at the most successful startup businesses of the last 20 years, most of them didn't just answer a problem better than others did. They solved a different problem. They solved the problem we didn't even know we had. So I'm going to speak today about to you as leaders, of leading with creative confidence. And just for clarity, I just want to make sure you understand this is not that deadly sins kind of confidence. This is not thinking you know the answer to every question. This is about self-confidence. This is about a belief in your own abilities and in the ability of your team, and a confidence that even if you don't know the answer, and usually with innovations you don't know the answer at the beginning. Even if you don't know the answer, you have the confidence that you have a methodology, that you have a process that will guide you to a successful result. Well, I found that it's helpful to start with definition of terms. And so here's what I mean exactly. Creative confidence. I mean two things in almost equal part. Here's thing number one. Natural human ability to come up with a fresh idea. And I honestly believe everybody has this. Everybody. Not enough to just have that natural ability. You have to also have the second half of creative confidence, which is the courage to act. You need people who not only have that idea, but have the courage to act on it, who will stand up for it, who will defend it, who will prototype it, and who will let go if it turns out not to be a good idea. You need individuals, you need leaders, you need an organization that acts with creative confidence. I'm going to talk about 4 elements of creative confidence, and this is the first. And here's the thing that I've noticed when people talk about design thinking around the world, people keep saying it's a technique for problem solving. And yes, it is, but it misses, I think, one of the most important points, which is this human-centered approach of design thinking starts before problem solving. If you have creative confidence, if you apply design thinking, you are scanning the world all the time, looking for problems other people aren't solving. If you look at the most successful startup businesses of the last 20 years, most of them didn't just answer a problem better than others did. They solved a different problem. They solved the problem we didn't even know we had, right? And so just to illustrate this with a company that I'm very, very close to, take a look at this photo. So this is how elderly people or people who are on a routine, take a lot of medicines routinely, this is how they deal with their medications everywhere in the world. This is a French woman, but I'm sure it's the same here in Malaysia as it is in the US and other parts of the world. My father, his doctors prescribe 16 prescription medicines every day, which seems crazy to me, but that's what the doctor said, and I'm not a doctor. And so what people do is they go to the pharmacy and they get those cylindrical bottles and they open them up and they put them into one of these. It's called a pill sorter, right? And so this is what is commonly called the status quo, right? So see the problem there? When you look at this photo, does a problem like jump out at you? Well, there is a problem there, but people haven't been paying attention. So a young guy named T.J. Parker in one of the smallest states of America, New Hampshire, looks at that and says, hey, I can do better than that. Of course you can do better than that, but you have to notice the problem to begin with. And so from this problem, he creates this great little company called PillPack. And PillPack is a smartphone app, and it's a pharmacy delivery system. And so what they do is instead of going to the store and getting your medicines and then sorting through them, you just, using the app, you tell PillPack what medications you take each day, and then PillPack sends you once a month this roll of medicines where every time you're supposed to take a medicine, there's a time stamp and a date stamp. So if you can read that, if you're close enough to read it, that says 8 a.m. Saturday morning. So if it's 8 a.m. Saturday morning, what am I supposed to do? I'm probably supposed to take those pills in that packet, right? And this delivers simplicity to people's lives. Your customers have complex lives. I don't even have to know your business to know that that's true. And so you deliver simplicity, they will notice. Your customers, let me just tell you, your customers do not lay awake at night thinking about your product, your service. They don't. They think about their lives, right? It's your job to wrestle with the complexity and deliver the simplicity to them. But let me just tell you, I know 100 companies who are so good at problem solving, they could solve that problem well. What TJ did was notice the problem in the first place. He chose a problem that others weren't paying attention to, that others weren't working on, and a very human-centered problem that he then solved well. So that's the first of these 4 about starting before problem solving, finding new, valuable problems to solve. Okay, so here's the second one. It's about making big change via small experiments. When I was doing my research for my books, I stumbled across this guy, Dean Keith Simonton. And this guy's written like 20 books. And see if you see a pattern in his books in any way. There's genius, there's creativity, or there's creativity and genius. Or, just for variation, genius and creativity. He flips them around sometimes just to get one more book out of it, right? But I think it is safe to say this guy is an expert on creative geniuses. And one of the things Dean Keith Simonton said is, hey, these so-called creative geniuses, they don't necessarily have a higher success rate than the rest of us. They try more stuff. So you as an individual, you as a company, you want to be the kind of people that try more stuff. And so in the Experimenter Hall of Fame, there's this guy, Jim Dyson. If you've ever heard him, you may have heard this story, which is Jim Dyson reports that when he was making the first vacuum cleaner, he had 5,128 prototypes. Think what that would feel like, right? Think of the conversation with your boss. Well, we've had 5,000. So far it hasn't worked, but give us another 100 or 2, we'll be there. He had the heart of an experimenter. He knew that he was not failing randomly. He was failing forward. He was learning from each experiment. And this is an important part in your career and in your company. So if you've got big change, find a way to break it down into small experiments. So the third of these 4 is about learning at a faster pace. So the world is changing out there really, really fast. And honestly, it doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how hard you work. If you as an individual and you as a company are not also learning at a very fast pace, you are falling behind every day, right? And so you got to be thinking about, how are we learning? How are we learning every day? There are many, many examples of this. This happens to be one of my favorite ones. It's a hospital in London. It's the most respected hospital in the UK. It's called the Great Ormond Street Hospital. This hospital is so respected in the UK that when they hosted the Olympics, in the Olympic opening ceremony, they mentioned this hospital. But the head of the intensive care unit there, they accept when patients, especially pediatric patients, come in from surgery, they go into intensive care. And this guy who heads the intensive care unit is watching the races one weekend, the Formula One races. And he happened to pay close attention to the pit stop. And they're kind of amazing, these pit crews. We had one come into IDEO one time to teach us about teamwork. But what he notices is, car pulls into the pit. They can change a tire in 8 seconds. You try changing a tire in 80 seconds. It's really hard, because we've done it in the teamwork exercise. And he says, what happens is, every person having exactly the right tools in their hand, knows exactly what their job is. They approach the car, they don't bump into anyone, they do whatever it is that they're supposed to do, and then they withdraw. And he says to his wife, look at that. It's like ballet, right? It's perfectly choreographed, and it's exactly the opposite of what happens in my intensive care unit. He says a patient comes in from the operating room, and they're carted in on wheels, not unlike those cars, right? They come in on wheels, and he says it's chaos for 5 minutes. Like, people are shouting things back and forth. Do this, don't forget this, you got to do this, watch out for that. And he says it takes like 5 minutes to settle down. And so he does this kind of innovative thing. He brings the Ferrari pit crew into his hospital. The Ferrari pit crew helped the Great Ormond Street Hospital, the intensive care unit, reduce technical errors by 42% and information errors by 49%. And I'm sure the numbers were already small, but they got a lot smaller because the leader looked outside the industry, looked outside the geography and said, hey, I can learn here. I can adapt and shape and translate that idea into my world, right? And change happened. So that brings us to the fourth of the four, which is about storytelling. Let me just say, in the early days of IDEO, we thought data would speak for itself. That, if you do good work, if you come up with the right answer, everyone should believe you. And now we think, how naive. Data does not speak for itself. You need to make your data come to life. You need to tell your stories as a leader and make your stories as sticky as an urban myth. And so just to illustrate this story thing, one last example, I said we didn't believe in stories in the early days. We got won over the course of many years. And so this was one of the people who won us over. We had a very close relationship with Steve Jobs in the early day of Apple. And Steve, at one point, he's holding up the very first iPod, not the iPad, but the original MP3 player. And he says, you know what this is? And I'm thinking, yeah, that's going to be an MP3 player. There were already players on the market. There was one called the Rio. There was one called the Rave. It's like, yeah, everybody's talked about this. I don't need that. Compression, it didn't interest me at all. But Steve, as the best corporate storyteller I have ever witnessed, Steve, he didn't talk about MP3 or compression or anything like that. Steve held up that original product and told a 6-word story. He says, you know what this is? He says, this is 1,000 songs in your pocket. Speaking to me as somebody who loves music, and me and everybody I know is like, gotta have one of those, gotta have one, right? And we waited in line to get the first MP3 player from Apple, the first iPod. So you see how he flipped it? Other competitors talked about compression technology, and honestly, who cares? Steve talked about me. Steve talked about my life. He told a 6-word story that changed my mind. What's your story? You don't have to do it in 6 words. What's your story? You have a message that is very important. You have a message that has meaning to you and maybe to all of your customers. The data is not going to speak for itself. Find your story, a story that carries your message forward. And so if you can do those 4 things, if you can take those 4 ideas to heart, it will go a long way towards helping you lead with your own unique creative confidence. Thank you very much.